Music. Whether you enjoy listening to it, dancing to it, or making it, music is a part of billions of people's daily lives all around the globe. In this documentary, we will explore the evolution of popular music throughout the centuries and how the music of the past is still influencing the music of the future. We will start at what is arguably the beginning of the modern era of music, classical music.
Starting the brigade of music is the early classical era. The classical era of music was one of the most sophisticated eras of music, with composers bringing a more intellectual approach to writing their pieces. There are a few classical artists that almost everyone knows, like Beethoven, Mozart, and Chopin. These composers worked very hard on their music they produced and loved doing it. Along with the era of music came the uprising of the piano. The piano formed classical artists into legends. With the piano came tons of opportunities to be able to compose pieces for any environment. Artists like Chopin made up the few child prodigies who were the elite class of composers who started young, playing in many different public places for giant crowds of people who are amazed at the talent coming out of the shadows.
Over the centuries, classical music evolved in many ways. The next era of music we will be looking at is jazz music in the early 20th century. Jazz music can trace its roots back to early America during the slave trade and how African and Western music combined to create early jazz.
I think that classical music chord progressions and instrumentation contributed to jazz in its early evolution in New Orleans, when there were African American slaves that were not allowed to sing music from Africa, and a lot of what they were allowed to play was based on Western European music. So it all was a blending of West African culture and Western European culture, kind of taking everything that was around them to make the early shapes of jazz. That all evolved from there. Modern jazz actually uses a lot of classical music as an influence, but it was there at the beginning for sure.
Even after the Civil War was fought and the slaves were free, segregation was still rampant throughout many American cities. New Orleans, however, was a different scenario. Possibly the most ethnically diverse American city in its time, New Orleans was a city that pushed many of these ethnic groups together in its red light district, instead of segregating minority and lower class people into separate ghettos. This unique blend of social classes and races, combined with a thriving music business in the area, was the birthplace of early jazz, along with one of the first big-time jazz musicians, Louis Armstrong. Louis was born in a very poor area of New Orleans and grew up hearing the music of big bands, ragtime, and classical, along with the wild drum circles that Mardi Gras gangs would play. In 1912, he was sent to a colored home for boys, where he had his first experience playing the cornet. Eventually, he created his own band, Louis Armstrong and his Hot Five. Him and his band became a huge hit, not only transforming jazz music from a big band thing to a soloist art, but also sealing jazz as the most popular music of the early 20th century. Jazz is a unique art form. It combines Western instruments and chord progressions with African rhythms and vocals, and takes influence from ragtime and the blues along with countless other forms of music. So much of modern music can trace its roots back for jazz, and modern jazz is still evolving and growing today.
In the history of rock and roll, the early music can be traced back to jazz music and country music. The most notable trait that early rock inherited from jazz is the swing style of beat on the cymbal to help keep time and keep the band from falling apart. One of the best-known musicians of the 1950s was Buddy Holly, who had a career that was tragically cut short but had a big impact on generations to come. Holly was born in Lubbock, Texas on September 7, 1936. The youngest of three brothers, Holly became very involved in music early when he would play with his brother's band. Once Holly graduated high school, he formed a band called the Crickets with Nicky Sullivan, Jerry Allison, and Joe Malden. The Crickets were an overnight sensation with hit songs Peggy Sue and That'll Be the Day, which landed them a tour of the Midwest with Richie Valens and the Big Bopper. After playing a show in Iowa, the musicians got on a charter flight which crashed and killed all 3 musicians on board. The influence that Buddy Holly had is indisputable, and he will never be forgotten. The instrument that Holly mainly played was the guitar. The guitar can be traced back to ancient Greece, but not much more is known about the ancestry of the guitar.
The 1970s was a period of change for the genre of rock and roll. New bands and artists helped to shape the flow of rock while maintaining the feel and steady rhythm. Led Zeppelin was a flagship band of the early stage of these developments, taking heavy influence from the blues. Despite their roots being almost solely in blues, the band branched and experimented with new sounds with each album. This would eventually lead to Led Zeppelin being one of the founding bands of the genre heavy metal, along with bands such as Deep Purple and Black Sabbath. Led Zeppelin began in 1968 by the guitarist Jimmy Page, later joined by John Paul Jones, Robert Plant, and finally John Bonham. These musicians were viewed as legendary to their own talent, and because of this and Page's songwriting ability, each instrument and lyric blended together to create renowned songs such as the universally recognized Stairway to Heaven. Page was talented when it came to soloing, netting Led Zeppelin the sick and completely deserved nickname of Shred Zeppelin. This was through his unique shredding technique, which was eventually adopted by other bands and genres.
Pop music was heavily influenced by rock. For example, a pop band, Panic at the Disco, was heavily influenced by Queen and Led Zeppelin. Specifically, Randy Ross, lead singer of Panic at the Disco, was a huge Queen fan, and you can see it in some of his songs how Queen has influenced him. That is just one example of many times where rock influenced pop, which led to great legends of pop like Michael Jackson, who really made pop as popular as it is today by introducing it to a whole generation with songs like I Want You Back and Say Say Say, which led to pop stars of today like Taylor Swift and Ariana Grande, and the invention of autotune, which led to other kinds of music and all new kinds of songs we could make. The inventor of autotune, Andy Hilbrand, invented autotune on accident, but because of the accident, we can take music even further into the future. Autotune was invented by an oil company on accident. They were trying to find oil by using sonar, but accidentally made music and realized that it could be used by the music artists of today like T-Pain. T-Pain was one of the first rappers to use autotune and really started introducing it to other rappers. Because of people like him, rappers started using it more and more often. And now who knows where music will go next, and it's really a mystery.